This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. The show begins with Kansas Farm Management Association Executive Director Mark Dikeman. He gives an overview of the 2022 KFMA Executive Summary. Kansas Farm Management Extension Ag Economist Glenn Conover, Trenton Hargrave, Lucas Sudbeck, Dillon Rapp, Clay Simons and Lindsay Bryant continue today's show as they discuss how 2022 fared for producers and their association from the KFMA Executive Summary. Concluding today's show is K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. He says there may be limited straw available for bedding this year, and dairy farmers should secure their supplies. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start today's show with an update from the Kansas Farm Management Association. And in to give that update is Executive Director Mark Dikeman. Mark, to get us started, could you talk about the report that's coming out soon from KFMA?
Here in the next few days, we'll be releasing the executive summary of the KFMA data from 2022, along with various summary reports, enterprise reports, and lots of data coming out in the next week or so from KFMA. All of that will be posted at AgManager.info/KFMA if you'd like further information.
And so to get started, a topic we've talked about a lot, but obviously has warrant to be talked about this much, the drought. What does that look like for Kansas in terms of economics?
The drought is definitely the story of 2022. If you were to look at a drought monitor map from August of 22, you could just about predict what the outcomes would look like for the state in terms of income. Through most of the state, yields were down, which drove profitability. If we look at crop yields, statewide, corn was down. Our average yield throughout the state was down about 40 bushels from 122 in 21 down to about 82 bushels in 22. Milo also down about 40 bushels, down from 86 in 21 down to 47 in 22. Soybeans, about an 18 bushel drop down to 24 bushels on average for the state in 22. Wheat wasn't as big of a hit, down about 10 bushels to 44. Those are all dryland yields. Even the irrigated yields were impacted some by the drought. So bushels really drove profitability in 22.
And from that, is drought really the main factor that affected those yields to have a decrease?
Yes, bushels would have had an impact. The good news, if there is some out of 22, is even though bushels were down, prices were very strong for much of the year. So even in areas that had reduced yields, profitability was decent, not as strong as it has been, but still reasonable. Across the state, net farm income average was $164,914, which is down quite a bit from the previous year, from 21, which our net farm income in 21 was about $319,000. But 21 was the second highest year we've had. When we adjust for inflation, 21 was the second most profitable year that we have had going back to 1970. 1973 was that most profitable year when we adjust for inflation. Because of the lower yields, we saw significant crop insurance payments and quite a bit of government payments as well. When we look at net crop insurance, so crop insurance indemnity payments minus premiums, the average across the state was $2,781, which made up about 56% of the farm income for the state. So a very large chunk of the net income came from crop insurance.
Quick question there, Mark, is we saw a big decrease in net farm income from 2021 to 2022. But if you look back to 2020, it's not as big as drop-off.
That's right. Net farm income for the state in 2020 was at almost $174,000. So we're down a little bit from there, but it's not a significant drop.
So even though that we see a really big jump, if you look past at even more back data, it doesn't feel quite as substantial.
That's correct.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing for producers?
I think it was a strong year for producers overall in terms of net farm income. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. I think besides the drought, the story of 2022 is the support programs that the federal government provides in terms of crop insurance and in government payments. Those really worked well in 22 to support farm incomes.
Could you touch more on kind of what those government programs were that really did support farmers?
So one of the bigger programs in 2022 was the Emergency Relief Program. Of the farms across the state, average Emergency Relief Program payment was $17,450. So that's about 10% of our net farm income. When we look at all government payments together, that was about $25,000, so about 15% of net farm income. You combine crop insurance, that net crop insurance, and the government payments together, it's about almost 72% of our net farm income for the year. So a pretty significant portion of the income comes from those government support programs.
So what is the financial position looking like for farmers?
I think things are looking good. We ended 21 in a very, very strong financial position, lots of working capital at the time, and that's helped producers to weather the storm of 22. If we look at working capital compared to the total of operating expenses plus interest, kind of a measure of how much producers will be able to work through the year without borrowing funds, that ratio is about 97%, which means working capital at the end of 22 was almost 100% of the total expenses or total operating expenses plus interest for 22. So that's a really strong, at least current position to be in. In addition, our farms ended up 22 with a debt-to-asset ratio of about 0.2, which, again, is very strong. So despite the poor yields, I think producers managed very well, managed their finances very well, and ended up the year in quite a strong financial position. For areas of the state that have yet to receive additional rain, 23 may be a little tough. But at the beginning of 23, they were in a fairly good position.
You just gave a quick definition of what working capital is. Could you also give a definition of what is net farm income?
With the KFMA data, we look at things on an accrual basis. We account for both inventories of prepaid expenses, seed, chemical, fertilizer, paid at the end of the year for the next year, as well as inventories of grain and livestock when we calculate net farm income. We do our best to make sure that net farm income values that we come up with reflect what happened in that year. And unlike taxable income, we account for prepays. We do not adjust depreciation for accelerated depreciation or bonus. Farmers have quite a few tools at their disposal when it comes to calculating taxable income depreciation. So we factor much of that out. So in the end, we're looking at accrual income, accrual revenue minus accrual expenses to get to our net farm income value.
Now, moving forward, as we've learned more and more about what had happened in Kansas in 2022, what did 2022 look like versus 2021?
At the beginning of 22, we were quite concerned about rising fuel costs, rising fertilizer cost, and obviously that impacted profitability of farms. Of the major crop inputs, seed expense was fairly flat, actually decreasing about 3% in total cost for the average of the farms that are in our summary. Fertilizer expense was up by about 40%. Fuel, as expected, was up about 30%. And chemicals, herbicide and insecticide, fungicide expense was up about 10%. So all those combined, overall expenses were up about $45,000 over 2021. The flip side of that is our value of farm production, our measure of gross revenue, was down about $110,000 from the previous year. So revenue down, expenses up, but compared to a very, very profitable year, we still ended 22 with a strong net farm income.
That sounds like some good news. And speaking of things going up and down, talking about interest and depreciation.
One of the measures that we like to look at for interest expense is an effective interest rate, where we take total interest expense and divide that by average total debt for the year. And comparing 2021 to 22, there was very little change in that. actual interest expense or cash interest expense was actually down from the previous year by about $2,300, which kind of indicates that the profitability that we saw in 21 was utilized well by farms in paying down debt and making sure that they were in a strong financial position. Depreciation expense-wise, I was quite surprised to see that there was very little change in average depreciation expense. There was a small increase, about $900, and I was surprised at that because often the year following a high-income year, we see a spike in depreciation because people make those purchases, make capital purchases to help offset some taxable income and reinvest in the farm. So that was a positive surprise from the results of the information.
So, Mark, to kind of give a wrap-up of Kansas, we have a lot of family farms in Kansas and all the different farm types. What is that looking like for Kansas?
When it comes to farm types, when we have a drought, having water plays a major impact in that. So the most profitable farm type in 21 were the farms that irrigate. As well, backgrounding operations, livestock operations had a decent year in 22. Of the four most profitable farm types, irrigators, or those that irrigate, crop background finish operations, and dairies all had the most profitable years of the particular farm types throughout the state.
That was Mark Dikeman, the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association that is housed in the Agricultural Economics Department here at Kansas State University. Mark informed us with what happened on farm operations in 2022 and what he is currently seeing for 2023. After the break, we're going to be joined by KFMA's Extension Ag Economist so they can give us an update on their association as we look across the whole state. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our KFMA update. Going into specific associations, and in to do that is Extension Ag Economist Glenn Conover, Trenton Hargrave, Lucas Sudbeck, Dillon Rapp, Clay Simons, and Lindsay Bryant. We're going to start in the Northwest region with Glenn. And Glenn, can we have an overview of how 2022 went in your association?
So we had a significant drop here in the Northwest Association from close to an all-time high in 2021. Dropping roughly 35% from around $412,000 in net farm income to $258,134. A large contributing factor to that was the rising input costs. In our association, crop production costs per harvested acre rose from $291 per acre to roughly $320 per acre. Our typical rainfall here in Northwest is around 20 to 22 inches of rain per year. And in 2022, we were around that 12 inches of rain. We didn't probably see as significant of a hit. We did lose around 7 bushels to the acre to a average of 41 bushels to the acre for 2022. Our dryland milo obviously fell significantly from around 85 bushels to the acre to 16. Dryland corn from 93 bushels to the acre to roughly 20 bushels to the acre. And our irrigated corn actually roughly stayed pretty close to our 5-year average. Going forward, it's hard to say because we did get some rain here recently, but will we continue to have that rain? Will it be there? And if we don't, specifically on our dryland fall crops, what effect that might have on our APH yields and thus crop insurance.
Moving on across the state to the right, we're headed to north central Kansas, which is Trenton Hargrave. And Trenton, overview of 2022.
2022 year in north central was kind of on par with the state as far as our net farm income dropped almost in half. We ended up with $146,042 net farm income due to two things, lower crop yields and higher expenses. Our gross crop value per acre dropped by $22, which, considering the drop in yields that we saw across our association, held together that number pretty good when you look at it. And we had a lot of farms that collected crop insurance on multiple crops, and we even had a fairly large number of farms that collected crop insurance on every crop that they had. To still end up with $146,000 net farm income, to me, is doing very well. But then just looking at the overall cost per acre changing drastically, really, our total expenses were increased by $116,000, so that it wasn't necessarily lack of dollars per acre. It was the added cost per acre, and we had some farms that did very well. Our soybean crop across our association was pretty marginal. I don't think anybody we had that we worked with had a bumper soybean crop. Corn was probably our biggest positive crop that we had. Corn and milo were our two best grain crops, corn being the larger crop that we see. Other than that, our wheat and soybeans were disappointing last year. Going into 23, wheat's not looking overly optimistic again. We're kind of being positive about thinking positive, especially starting to get some rain, some moisture across our association. So thinking positive about our fall crops, but our wheat didn't fare too well going through the winter.
As we continue to zoom across the state, we're joined with Lucas Sudbeck from Northeast Kansas. And Lucas, what did 2022 look for your association?
The story for Northeast Kansas was probably a little bit different than most of the state. Government payments is about 2.7% of our total net farm income. Crop insurance, the return on that didn't even cover the crop insurance premiums. Net farm income last year in 2021 was sky high. It was $300,000, just like everywhere, and it dropped about a third, so we were still sitting about $200,000. Input prices shot up like they did for everybody. Total farm expenses this year went up over $150,000 compared to the year before, but our value of farm production actually increased, so it was over $900,000 per farm. The drop in net farm income was actually due to the increase in prices of inputs rather than the fact that they weren't producing as well.
We're going to move on down south now to southeast Kansas. We have Dillon Rapp. And Dillon, as usual, could you give us an overview of what 22 looked like for your association?
Well, we started out with a pretty decent wheat crop, grew around 55 bushel on average wheat, and with the prices experienced last year, wheat was one of our more profitable crops. And then, like some of the other parts of the state, it stopped raining. Most of our weather challenges the last 4 or 5 years have actually been related to excessive moisture rather than lack of moisture. So the end of 22 was kind of a shocker for us. And then our corn averaged about 64 bushel across the whole association, which is a little misleading because some of the counties up north that border the area Lucas was just talking about grew pretty decent corn. Franklin County averaged about 120, 125 bushel corn. And then the further south and east you go, the worse it got. Cherokee, Crawford, Lebec counties, they only averaged about 30 bushel corn for the entire counties. So very poor on the corn yields. So it's just really hard to bring in very many dollars generating those kinds of yields, especially with as expensive as it is to grow corn, as you know, with the seed and the fertilizer costs. And then our beans didn't do much better than the corn. Early beans averaged about 18 bushel, and then the double crop beans that followed the wheat only averaged about 12 bushel. So just very poor bean yields compared to what we've been having the last 3 or 4 years, where beans have really been the driver of our profitability in this area. We finished up with an average net income of just shy of $146,000, which was a little less than half of what we had for 2021. Similarly, our crop insurance was a big driver of the net income last year. I think we may have had the highest percentage of crop insurance of our net income of any of the associations, where if we're looking at that net crop insurance, which is the total indemnities paid out less the cost of the premiums, that was actually greater than what our net income was. So it was 104%. So without the impact of crop insurance, our net income would have been a negative $6,000 and some odd dollars. And then I think the government payment piece, it was also a pretty important part of our net income. We averaged about $32,000 of total government payments, which was quite a bit of the ERP program payments and also livestock forage payments. Due to the drought later on in the year, we had some pretty substantial livestock drought payments. That was really kind of the difference between our net farm income and our family living expense was the government payment. So I guess you could say that that was kind of the piece that helped us still manage to improve our financial positions despite kind of a challenging year compared to what we had in 2021.
Now, Clay Simons, heading to you in South Central Kansas. What did 2022 look like for you guys?
2022 was definitely a down year compared to 2021. our net farm income was cut in more than half. We were at just a little over $124,000 of net farm income. We had a pretty decent wheat crop, just a little below average, and so that really helped. But our corn, milo, and bean yields were between 50 and 60% dry land, and so, it really boils down to praise the Lord for crop insurance. It really helped us, on the surface compared to last year. 124,000 is quite a bit, but that's still not a bad net farm income. And so the safety net did behave the way you would really expect it to. Our expense structure across the association for 22 was up. We were about 20% higher on our input costs. It could have been a lot worse, but with crop insurance helping us out and everything, it ended up being on average a pretty decent year for most of our farmers.
And Lindsay, we're rounding out the state of Kansas and southwest Kansas. What'd you see in 2022 there?
Our net farm income was down significantly as well in 2022 compared to 21. 2021 yields and prices kind of came together, resulting in a very strong year for our association. So 2022 is definitely not the same story as our production fell off due to the severity of the drought we're experiencing. Our wheat yields were down, but surprisingly not as bad as expected. However, all of our other yields were down significantly, both irrigated and dry land. So definitely looking a little different in 2022 and more dire the further west you go, but really impacting all counties in the Southwest Association this year. Along with the decreased yields, also, as everyone else has said, the input costs were at an all-time high, also just resulting in a tough year all around. Our net farm income came in at about $144,000 for 2022, with our gross crop insurance and government payments making up about $140,000 of it. So without the combination of the two, on average, our producers would have basically broken even without much of anything left over to cover family living expenses and other non-deductible expenses. And our farms that were in the lower 25% experienced a $20,000 loss, actually, despite the government payments and crop insurance. So looking a lot more difficult towards the lower end of our quartiles. These numbers are tough, especially with family living costs always on the rise. Family living in our association was up about $11,000 this year, from $87,000 to $98,000. Despite the poor year, our net worth on average was still up around $95,000, and working capital still strong. So it wasn't completely devastating yet. If we do see another year like this in 2023, could be a different story. And unfortunately, 2023 isn't shaping up to be a whole lot better here in Southwest. And the drought's also significantly affected cattle producers as well. We're seeing many start to sell off their cow herds because there's no grass to graze. I think it's going to be pretty difficult to get that established back. Some of it seems like it's fairly damaged at this point. So unfortunately, unless our weather pattern changes significantly in 2023, it's not looking like it's going to be much better, and the negative financial effect of 2 bad years in a row is going to be tough.
That was KFMA Extension Ag economist Lindsay Bryant. She was joined with other Extension Ag economists Clay Simons, Dillon Rapp, Lucas Sudbeck, Trenton Hargrave, and Glenn Conover as they discussed how their region went in 2022. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says it looks like there may be limited supplies of straw for the 2023-24 season. As a result, he's encouraging dairy farmers who haven't yet secured straw for bedding to do so as soon as possible, as well as be prepared to pay more and to possibly have to buy straw from several sources. He also says that farmers may have an opportunity to increase forage supplies following the harvest of wheat by planting a corn hybrid, milo, or sorghum.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning securing forages for the coming year. As we approach wheat harvest, it looks like across the state, we will probably likely have limited supplies of straw. So if you have not secured your straw needs for the next year, it's important that you do that sooner rather than later. Looks like straw price will be up this year based on what we're seeing for other forages as well. So expect to pay more for the straw that you will utilize for feeding as well as for bedding your animals. I do think that if we start early, we should be able to secure what we need for the next year. but keep in mind that the supply is going to be short, so you may have to go to several different suppliers to find enough to cover the needs of your herd. I would expect that we should plan to pay more for that straw, probably somewhere in the range of $30 to $40 a ton more than what we may be paid in 2022. If you're willing to do that, you should be able to secure what you need. However, if you're looking for some cheaper alternatives, you may have to think about what you might change in your operation in order to take advantage of some other types of bedding. There are other types of bedding available, and from time to time we do try to utilize things like composted manure as a part of the bedding source for our animals. This may work fairly well in some areas of the dairy. However, when you start looking at the calving area as well as bedding for calves, this may not be the bedding of choice, as it does not absorb quite the moisture that we would get from straw. Due to the limited supply of sawdust across the state, it's not really an option for us in most areas. If you do utilize sawdust as an alternative for straw, make sure that it is kiln dried. Green sawdust generally does increase our chances of mastitis, in particular for Klebsiella type organisms that cause a form of E. coli mastitis. This can be very severe and very detrimental to your animals. So again, if you're looking to cheapen up bedding costs and you find some green sawdust that's available, keep in mind that you're taking a risk if you use this with lactating cows or even dry cows and transition cows. Looking at the other forages that we will need in the coming year, corn crop is mostly planted at this time. There may be some opportunities for some double crop following wheat. I would expect wheat harvest is going to be a little bit earlier this year based on our weather conditions. And if that is the case, that gives us another week or two into the growing season. So planting a short season corn hybrid following wheat may be a way to increase your forage supply, i.e. corn silage, for the lactating herd as well as some of your heifers and dry cows. This may be an excellent option if you're concerned about trying to grow extra tons of feed for your dairy herd. Another option would be to plant milo or sorghum following harvest of wheat. And again, if we get late season rain, that can yield lots of tonnage, maybe not the highest quality feed, so it may not be something that we would use in our lactating cows, but it would be something that we could use for dry cows and heifers, and it may be a smaller portion in the lactating cow rations as well. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to make sure that they plan ahead for their annual straw needs, as well as looking at some other crops to increase the total forage available for the 23-24 feeding season.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.